With all honesty, I'd have to say TADC Episode 5 Untitled is my favorite episode of the series so far. It does such great character work for much of the cast, and the adventures the cast go on in this episode were so fun and out of the box when it came to the creativity. And these are all praises that Vanity Moth, the topic of this video, shares in his video on the episode as well. However, he also has quite a number of criticisms with the episode as well, which I will be getting into. I do want to note though, however, that it's incredibly evident that Vanity Moth recorded and made this video before episode 6 released, where a lot of his criticisms, I say with air quotations, are fixed. So for the sake of engaging with his argumentation in good faith, I won't be using anything from episode 6 in my rebuttals. But with that being said, let's jump in.
But outside of her interactions with Cain, this is easily Zubal's best episode as she contributes a lot to this entry with both sides of her personality being on full display, with her genuinely wholesome and supportive interactions with Gangle always brightening the mood, and her abrasive and mean side being more confrontational than we have ever seen before, with her hostile, intense interactions with Jax. Be that as it may, we are now 5 episodes into the series, and she has barely had any interactions with Pomni, and with her character being so defined by her friendship with Gangle and her rivalry with Jax and Cain, it leaves little room for her to ever develop any sort of dynamic with Ragatha, Kinger, or the main character of this series, which is a blind spot that isn't an immediate concern, but something that needs to be rectified before the series ends.
This is a simple problem to explain due to the fact that Zubul throughout all of the episodes except episodes 4 and 5 have been incredibly disinterested in engaging in any of the adventures, and even in episodes 4 and 5, she was forced into them. You can't expect a character like Zubul to develop dynamics with the rest of the cast in adventures when one of the main traits about their character is that they are disinterested in going on adventures in the first place, preventing them from developing dynamics with the cast. Now, you can argue that episode 4 is a case where they do mishandle Zubul, since while they are forced into an adventure, they don't have many interactions with the characters. However, this makes sense if we look at the context of the episode. Not only is it a Gangle-focused episode, but the situations they are in where they don't display any other interactions with the cast is justified, simply because they are solely interested in just doing their job so that Cain doesn't punish them.
So you're just, like, actually doing the job?
Yeah, I don't want Cain to punish me.
Cain's not gonna do anything malicious. It's not in his nature.
You really want to find out? The only thing holding Cain back is the fact that he likes us. I wouldn't push it.
That's rich coming from you.
Zubul is afraid of what Cain might do to them if they don't play along, and while you can argue that they could have written in ways to force them to interact more with the cast, I would argue it would be out of character for them to stay off task, because Zubul does bring up a good point of the fact that Cain is only nice to them because he likes the cast. So in their eyes, not pushing it with Cain would be the smart, consistent choice given their line. Finally, as for Zubul not having much of their personality explored, this harkens back to what I said about them not engaging in adventures because it is a part of their character trait of being disinterested in Cain's shenanigans. And it's not like the show doesn't explore their personality at all, which would be a problem, as they are explored in episode 3 that is separated from their relationship with Gangle, and especially in episode 5. With all this in mind, them being explored more in Untitled is solely a positive of the episode.
As for Kinger, however, even though he is still the best written character, his importance within this episode is quite low and is probably the weakest link of the characters in this entry, as he never gets any meaningful character interactions, and in a comedy-focused episode like this one is, his comedic effectiveness ends up being overshadowed, making him kind of just being that character who is there but never stands out.
This isn't a flaw with the show due to the fact that the episodes are very clearly centered around one of the main cast. Episode 1 being Pomni, episode 2 being about Pomni again, episode 3 being about Kinger and Zubul, episode 4 being about Gangle, and episode 5 being about Jax and Ragatha. If you want to talk about characters getting sidelined, I could easily point to Jax, Gangle, and Ragatha getting sidelined throughout episode 3 just to simply sip tea with the ghosts of Mildenhall Manor. It's simply become part of the show's nature to not always shine the spotlight on some characters in favor of fleshing out the desired character for the episode, and that's okay. It gives the show the ability to give these characters their own time and space to develop without it risking ruining their character development for the whole cast if it tries to juggle all of them at once. And as for Kinger's humor, I suppose you could argue he could have been utilized more comedically, though I'm not one to laugh at anything unless it's on rewatch or incredibly stupid, so I'm not the best authority when it comes to comedy. There's a reason I don't write it.
And I dare say the same is true for Pomni to a lesser extent, as as she is fairly unremarkable outside of her interactions with other characters in this episode. The most notable thing about her is that we learn that she used to be an accountant and would explore abandoned buildings for cheap thrills, which explains how she found the computer that brought her into the digital circus to begin with, but outside of that, Pomni is defined by her never-ending journey of being everyone's therapist, with her seemingly being the only one who has started to peel away the layers of Jax's mean guy facade and has begun to see him as more of a person than a nuisance, unlike everyone else in the circus.
I have to question why you think Pomni is now defined as being everyone's therapist. Pomni throughout the show in episode 5 has shown to be a truly empathetic character, but up until episode 3, she was also scared. She may have been scared since first entering the circus, as anyone reasonably would when you're suddenly being transported somewhere so wacky and zany out of nowhere, but she doesn't let that stop her from being empathetic when she senses someone is hurting. With cases like Gummy Goo and Gangle, she is shown to be caring and understanding, helping those go through their struggles because not only does she know the feeling, but to be quite honest, up until Kinger, she didn't have anyone else to help her through her issues, which makes her interaction with Gummy Goo all the more impactful. She didn't let her fear stop her from recognizing the feelings of someone else. And speaking of Kinger, Pomni's interactions with him not only fervent that she is not perfect, but she's also not someone that you can just always come to when you need help. She's scared like everyone else and needs people that care about her like everyone else, but she doesn't let her fear stop her from caring about others because of one simple truth.
In this world, the worst thing you can do is make someone think they're not wanted or loved.
This is different than someone like Ragatha because she is only caring and understanding to everyone else in a toxically positive way that pushes everyone else away, especially Jax due to it coming off as insincere. To reduce her down to just being everyone's therapist is to disregard the fact that she's being understanding on her own volition, not because she was forced to, but because she actually cares about the rest of the cast. It's like Gummy Goo said when Pomni offered him a place at the circus.
Why are you trying to cheer me up? How does this benefit you at all?
I guess I just don't want you to feel like you're nothing. I don't want anybody to feel like that.
She wasn't forced to say that. In fact, she was even hesitant to comfort him in the beginning because, like Gummy Goo said as well, we're just obstacles meant to be defeated and forgotten. But she comforted him and offered him a place anyway because she chose to try and understand how he was feeling and make him feel better, because her character is not defined by being everyone's therapist, but instead by being someone who tries to care and understand others sincerely because she knows the feeling of feeling like you're nothing. Which is even substantiated in episode 5 by her seeking mild thrills, supporting that she sought them out because she was tired of feeling like she was nothing. In the end, it's just like what she said when Jax and Ragatha were arguing on what she should be.
I can think for myself, guys.
And while this is necessary for Jax to develop as a character, I can't help but feel that Pomni befriending Jax felt rushed and unearned. Like, over the course of 5 episodes, Pomni has seen Jax be nothing but mean to everyone else, herself included, and all it took was for him to make one verbal slip for her to care enough to want to get to know him better. This does, however, still work if you take into consideration in the prior episode, Pomni did get to see Jax with his guard down and just acting normal, so it isn't unbelievable that she would want to give him a fair chance, but it still feels like their friendship should have been built up throughout at least 2 episodes, given that he is the only person in the circus that Pomni disliked.
Yes, Pomni did try to get to know him after he showed some vulnerability, but that was because, like you said, he was nothing but a jerk to her and the rest of the cast. However, the key factor is that her character is being understanding of others. Like Gummy Goo at first, she only viewed him as an NPC until he showed vulnerability of feeling like nothing. We even see her be understanding again with Kinger after he showed vulnerability in episode 3 by revealing he had a wife to her, which resulted in her not only being friendly with him but also attempting to defend him by mentioning he had a wife to the rest of the cast in the bar scene. So I don't see why her attempting to get to know Jax better, even though just a little bit, is somehow rushed and unearned, since this is something that makes sense for a character to do and something she has been doing for characters since episode 2, especially since Jax himself throughout the episode was subtly trying to get to know her better, with Pomni shoving it aside as insincere due to him being a jerk, until Jax showed that there was more to his character than just being a jerk. This is all in character.
But outside of Jax, we also get to see Pomni begin to interact with Ragatha, as opposed to Ragatha interacting with her, and I am very conflicted with how their relationship is developing. On the one hand, the fact that Ragatha is the nicest person in the circus, is the one person Pomni is the least comfortable around, is a very interesting juxtaposition and made me interested in seeing more of their interactions in future episodes. But on the other hand, I can't help but dislike Pomni more because of how distant she is towards Ragatha. I understand that Ragatha is being portrayed as a disingenuous person, but given the fact that Ragatha opened up about her traumatic experiences in the bar scene, you would think Pomni would be able to put two and two together and figure out why Ragatha is the way she is, just like she did for Kinger, Gangle, and is actively doing for Jax. But for some reason, unlike everyone else, Pomni doesn't even try to understand why Ragatha turned out the way she did, making Pomni come across like she isn't giving Ragatha a fair chance, unlike everyone else in the show. It got to the point where near the end of the episode when Ragatha yells at Pomni, it felt cathartic and well-deserved, because while Ragatha has been putting in so much effort to befriend Pomni, she seemingly just gets ignored, while Pomni is putting in the effort to befriend everyone else, with her main focus now being Jax.
Except for the fact that Ragatha does try to understand why Ragatha is the way she is, or at least tries to comfort her through her struggles like she did with Gummigoo.
Not to, agree with Jax or anything, but there's nothing wrong with showing your negative emotions. That's pretty normal.
I don't know. I don't want to be a jerk or anything.
I think we all need to be a jerk sometimes.
Maybe. Who knows?
She listened to what Ragatha said at the bar, and when Ragatha was upset during the softball game, she attempted to comfort her by saying it's okay to show your negative emotions because it's unhealthy to hold them in and it's something everyone does. She was in a character of understanding, just like with everyone else. However, the difference with Ragatha is that Ragatha became slightly hostile towards her after her attempt at comforting her, with Ragatha subtly being annoyed or even angry at the fact that Pomni is enjoying Jax's company, which causes Pomni to become uncomfortable. The issue isn't the fact that Ragatha yelled at Pomni during her crash out, because Pomni understood it wasn't actually about her and accepted her apology, but it was the fact that Ragatha has now somewhat or at least appeared hostile towards Pomni at the end of the softball game. It also doesn't help that Pomni didn't necessarily disagree with Gangle or Jax questioning how genuine Ragatha was actually being.
I'm sure Ragatha would like to help you out.
Oh, Ragatha. I love her, but after a while it gets kinda hard to tell how genuine she's actually being.
Doesn't she get on your nerves sometimes?
I mean, she's nice to everyone.
I don't know. I think she tries way too hard. Like, we're stuck in... Why are you always pretending everything's always fine? Like, if you tell someone they're loved and appreciated every day, it kind of loses all meaning. It just feels like she's trying to take advantage of you, you know? I don't know.
Ultimately, this all only fueled her motivation to distance herself from her.
Who is at his most serious in this episode, as we do get to see more of him than just being the mean guy, and it works as a sort of build-up to whatever grand reveal in a future episode, exposing why he's mean to everyone, with it being heavily hinted that he had a friend in the circus that abstracted. But outside of that build-up, he's never as mean or chaotic as he was in Candy Carrier Chaos, which was his best episode, and is kind of just an ongoing attention-hoarding nuisance instead of the chaotic menace he was back in that episode. So while his development is captivating, his actual character is very samey, as he never does or says anything shocking or cruel enough to make him live up to the expectations he has built up for himself throughout the series.
Wow, it's almost like characters can have different layers to their character and not always stay the same from the beginning, like how Kinger is now not just the crazy one because of episode 3 revealing another layer to his character. I'm also confused on what you mean by the expectations Jax has set for himself, because you don't elaborate on that really. Shows don't keep their characters static all the time, so for the show to simply reveal different layers to a character is not bad writing because it didn't follow your headcanon of what the characters are supposed to be like in the show. Not to mention that him being, as you say, an attention-hoarding nuisance helps build upon his asshole persona, because newsflash, assholes do this in real life as well, or in your words, menaces. His nature isn't purely inflicting physical harm, but also mental and emotional harm, which ultimately lines up with how he acts in episode 5.
But while Jax is at the forefront of this episode and is having his development focused on, Ragatha is in the background as her development is progressing passively. She does get a scene where she monologues about her past, revealing that she was a wealthy farm girl, which explains her design, but more importantly, she recalls her emotionally abusive relationship with her mother that seemingly traumatized her so much that it can be reasonably speculated that she's nice to everyone because she doesn't want to become a cruel person like her mom was. This is an alright and understandable reason for her personality, but given that we don't know Ragatha that well, and we never actually get an example of the things her mother said to her, this backstory isn't all that engaging. It might just be because I'm so desensitized to characters having bad parents in indie animated shows, but until Ragatha's backstory is explored more in depth, she isn't much more interesting or empathetic of a character than she was before, which are often the reasons for characters having a backstory to begin with.
While I agree that Ragatha isn't really the most interesting character in the show, I wouldn't say her backstory not being elaborated on that much is a detriment to her character. For example, Zubul, Gangle, and Pomni didn't elaborate much on their backstories, only recounting their professions, but they are still engaging regardless. And to go even further, Jax doesn't even reveal anything about his backstory in the slightest, yet he is arguably one of the top 3 most engaging characters in the show to most of the fandom. The issue really lies with her character being consumed by her toxic positive attitude, which I do think is a point because it's her insecurity that doesn't allow her to really form any dynamics of any of the characters until episode 6, but to me at least it has an unintended consequence of making her not very engaging to watch aside from her crash out and her ramblings in episode 4 when she was affected by the stupid sauce, which were both times sincere, at least the former, because it was a glimpse into her true character which was engaging to see when it happened. Ultimately, I would argue this is more of a personal issue than an objective flaw with the writing, since I recognize that Ragatha has a different role in the show than everyone else, it just happens to not be as engaging to me from a subjective standpoint.
However, just because a show is character focused doesn't mean that the characters are the only thing that matter. And when you look at what Untitled has to offer outside of the characters, it puts a spotlight on the biggest problems the Amazing Digital Circus has as a show. An issue that the Amazing Digital Circus has continuously struggled with is that there has been a disconnect between the premise of the series and the characters' interactivity with that premise and the events in the show. In the pilot with the Glowing Queen and in Candy Carrier Chaos with the Fudge, and the entire setting that episode took place in, it felt like the adventures were an afterthought that the characters didn't care about, and as a result became meaningless wastes of screen time. Thankfully, that issue was fixed in The Mystery at Mildenhall Manor and Fast Food Masquerade, where the characters took the adventures seriously enough for new aspects of their personalities to shine through and have their characters develop. But with Untitled, the issue with the first 2 episodes is back, where the adventures, the premise of the series, is the worst part of the Amazing Digital Circus as a show. So while I loved the bar scene, it is worth noting that we learned so much about these characters with them doing nothing other than sitting and talking to each other, which while is praiseworthy, at the same time, the best moment of a 26-minute episode was the characters sitting and talking. The reasons episodes 3 and 4 were so good was because the characters' growth were directly tied in with the events of the episode. But with the bar scene, we are now just learning about all the characters without them actually doing anything to prompt them into sharing who they are, which feels much more lazy and unearned. And a similar point could be said when they are stargazing, where nothing is happening, and that's when the Amazing Digital Circus is at its most intriguing. Even the softball game doesn't focus on playing softball, it focuses on character interactions that are happening on the bench. And this is where you realize that in Untitled, the development of our group of characters isn't working in tandem with the premise of the series. All the best scenes that happened within this episode could have happened in the same way if they were all just placed in an empty room together for an entire episode. The adventures themselves don't matter because in this episode, nobody is taking them seriously, which I get is a point in the series itself because there are no consequences to anything that happens within the circus. But if the cast doesn't take the events that are happening within the show seriously, then what is actually happening in the show becomes uninteresting and the worst part of the show.
So you just went on that whole tangent complaining about how the show doesn't work in tandem with the adventures, only to admit that that is a point of the show. The characters, specifically Ragatha and Kinger, literally admit that the adventures feel pointless.
What did any of that mean?
Oh, that's just one of Kane's little adventures. They're just something fun to do to, prevent us from going insane.
I know how I can feel in this circus. Sometimes it all just feels pointless.
If the Avengers are not engaged properly by the characters is a point that is made multiple times throughout the show, like how Zubul refuses to engage with the Avengers as a part of a character, and Jack's just messing around and not properly following the structure of the Adventures, but it's not a writing flaw of the show because it is a precedent that the show has set for itself. The cast besides Pomni have been in the circus for so long that the charm and fun of Kane's adventures have become tiresome and not worth engaging with anymore, besides keeping them from going insane. And by extension, Kane has become tiresome and not worth engaging with anymore either, since the adventures are an extension of himself, something that is revealed in episode 5 that he is self-conscious about.
I think they're enjoying the suggestion box adventures more than the me adventures. What should I do?
You should die. You should throw a beach party.
Why do you swear now?
That's why he's intentionally trying to make the adventures as wacky and different as possible to get the cast engaged. Such as in episode 3 where he made the adventures mature simply to get Zubul on board since they weren't engaging with the adventures. He's desperate to do a good job of making adventures because in his eyes that's the only thing he's good at, and if he's not good at that, then what does that make him? With this in mind, it ultimately becomes a personal grievance of the show of the adventures being uninteresting.
There was a solution to this issue presented in the prior episode with the introduction of a grading system to incentivize the cast to take the adventure seriously so they can't just refuse to play along with the adventure like Jax did during the softball game, but that element of world building that only happened a single episode ago is completely absent and forgotten, leading to the reintroduction of a writing issue this series has already solved.
Considering the solution isn't a consistent aspect of the adventures, we can safely assume that it was simply a one-and-done deal, backed up by the fact that it wasn't even Kane's idea, but rather Gangle's, and was more of a way to enhance the theme of the minimum wage working experience in the fast food industry under a big corporation. The adventures have always been consistently AWOL, so it's not fair to say that it's a writing flaw of episode 5 when it's just following what the episodes before it did, with episode 4 being a special unique case. And considering Kane is near omnipotence in the digital circus, like how he can simply transport people at will, it would be more in good faith to interpret Kane as simply wanting the cast to engage with his adventures on their own volition rather than being forced to, which would validate his feelings of inadequacy as they would be enjoying the adventures because of his craftsmanship.
However, even though Untitled was disappointing comedy-wise, it more than made up for by being the only episode to actually set up future events for the series. Another problem the Amazing Digital Circus has had is that it hasn't felt like it's going anywhere, and because of that, it's been difficult to be invested in what's happening within the series. But between Ragatha's buildup of having a major falling out with Pomni, hints about Jax having a friend who abstracted, and there being either a rogue AI or a forgotten member of the Digital Circus that's been hiding away spying on the group, this episode built up a lot of intrigue for the future of the series, and for the first time ever, I actually am anticipating the next episode of The Amazing Digital Circus to see how these plotlines unravel.
I have to ask again, what do you mean by the series not going anywhere until episode 5? You don't elaborate on what you mean by the show not going anywhere up to this point, because do you mean plot-wise or character-wise? It's not the viewer's job to elaborate or fill in the blanks for your argument for you. This will only result in aimless interpretation of what you vaguely meant by what you said, leading to people taking what they only think you said in all kinds of wild directions without fully understanding what you actually meant. You are simply spitting out meaningless words with no substance behind them because you refuse to add substance to them in the first place, leading to this a dead end where I found myself trying to understand what you mean, only to be stuck in this labyrinth of hollow sentences you have presented to the viewers. There's value in explaining your thoughts further to generate fruitful discourse, something that you have unfortunately failed to do at the end of this video. Though speaking of the end of this video, that's the end of this video of Vanity Mob's critique of Untitled. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and I'll see you all in the next video.